The 20th Maine began July 2nd, marching into the area south of Gettysburg in the early morning hours. They were placed in reserve near the intersection of Baltimore Pike and Granite Schoolhouse Lane, right in the center of the famous Union fishhook-shaped line of battle, from where they could be ordered to any place in line that they may be needed. That call came in the afternoon, when they were ordered to march southwest toward the left of the Union line. They soon arrived at the edge of the wheat field and formed in line of battle, ready to charge into the fray. Before they could, new orders came to march to the hill directly behind them and take up new positions there. As they marched around the hill to get under cover, an enemy artillery shell exploded over their heads. Rufus Jacklin, adjutant of the 16th Michigan, was riding at the head of his regiment when the shell burst and a piece of it took off the top of his horse's head, killing it instantly. The horse's body fell on Jacklin's leg, badly injuring it. Jacklin's pension file at the National Archives has nearly a dozen affidavits from members of his regiment describing the scene in detail. Just in front of Jacklin, the chaplain of the 20th Maine witnessed the gruesome event and rode off in search of someone important to tell. Not far ahead in the column, Colonel Joshua Chamberlain was riding with his two brothers, Tom, who was serving as the adjutant of the regiment, and John, who had taken advantage of a break from school to pay a visit to his brothers at the front. After seeing the effect of the shell, Colonel Chamberlain sent John ahead to scout out a place for the wounded, and Tom rearward to see that the regiment was moving along in good order. Otherwise, he told them, another shot like that could make it hard for Mother. To reach the top of the hill, the brigade likely took advantage of an old logging road used to take timber from the top of the hill months before. This brought them out of the woods at the southern end of the hill, just where the enemy seemed intent on attacking. Colonel Vincent placed them in line along a spur of the hill that stuck out from the southern end, about half as high as their main hill. The four regiments went into line in the order they had marched. First, the 44th New York, then the 83rd Pennsylvania, the 20th Maine, and the 16th Michigan. However, before the 16th could take its place on the left of the brigade, Colonel Vincent redirected them to the right end. Unfortunately, Colonel Chamberlain was unaware of the change of position and still believed the 16th Michigan was off to his left. As soon as they went into position, Chamberlain dispatched Company B to link up with the skirmisher of the 16th Michigan and spread out across the front of the regiment as a sort of early warning system. Also unaware that the 16th was no longer on their left, Company B moved ever leftward until they could hear shooting behind them. At this point, they moved directly left and found a stone wall to set up behind until they could figure out what was happening. They were joined there by members of Berdan's sharpshooters. The sound of shooting they heard was the arrival of the Confederate flank attack in the form of the 15th Alabama Regiment. In a remarkable case of near miss, they had somehow passed over the same ground that Company B had traveled, missing them by just a few moments. The 15th Alabama, commanded by Colonel William C. Oates, was the far right unit of the Confederate assaulting force, and the undersized 47th Alabama, just to their left, was acting in concert with the 15th. As the two units marched down the lower reaches of Round Top, they opened fire on the 20th Maine and the 83rd Pennsylvania. Owing to the angle of approach, the 47th came into view of the enemy first and received the full force of the two Union regiments. Within minutes, they had fallen back and out of the fight. This left Oates' 15th Alabama even further disconnected from the rest of the Confederate assault, now more than 200 yards away. As the rightmost regiment in the assault, it was critical for Oates to locate and attack the end of the Union line in front of him. As the 20th Maine fired at the 47th Alabama, the flash of the muzzles of their guns told Oates where the end of their line was located. In response, he ordered his men to shift to their right so as to overtake the enemy flank. As they did, his men came into view of some of the men from Maine who could make out the movement of their legs through the tree line, working toward their exposed flank. When word reached Colonel Chamberlain of this flanking maneuver by the enemy, he ordered his men to stretch the regimental line to the left, thinning it but making it much longer, while bending it back to receive any attack from beyond their flank. Not long after they had accomplished this move, the right half of Oates' regiment moved up the slope toward the 20th, fully expecting to take them in the flank and rear by surprise. Instead, they ran directly into the newly created front of the 20th Maine, whose first volley was, according to Oates, the most destructive fire I ever saw. Startled by the sudden turn of events, Oates' men fell back to the bottom of the spur, from where they launched 2 or 3 more attacks over the next hour. Exhausted from the fighting and the march of more than 24 miles to reach the battlefield earlier that day, Oates' men had little left. He sent word to the clumps of men scattered along the bottom of the spur that, when they got the signal, They should run in the direction they had come in hopes of reforming a line with the rest of their brigade on the slopes of Round Top. At the top of the spur, Colonel Chamberlain saw the Alabamians organizing, he assumed, for another assault. As the last attack had nearly succeeded, he knew his men could not withstand another. In his mind, he formed the idea of charging down the hill in the hopes of breaking up the remaining Alabamians and preventing another attack. He ordered his men to fix bayonets. But before he could order a charge, the men holding the regimental colors at the center moved forward a few paces to retrieve some wounded comrades in their front. Seeing the colors move, the men on the far left of the regiment moved as well, and before long they were on their way down the slope of the hill and into the groups of Confederates. Some of the enemy ran straight back where the Maine men captured them in a farm lane. Others ran directly toward the stone wall behind which Company B had been waiting. Seeing this, the Mainers leapt over the wall shouting so as to seem like more of them than there really were. More Alabamians surrendered, while the rest followed Oates' order and ran back the way they had come. In pursuit of the fleeing rebels, the rest of the 20th Maine ran down the spur, chasing the Alabamians in the direction they were running. By coincidence, this gave the general impression that the left half of the regiment was performing some great right wheel, when in fact it was simply the result of the chaos of combat. When they had reached the bottom of the spur and chased the enemy far enough, the 20th Maine found they had more than 200 prisoners of both the 15th and 47th Alabama regiments. In all, the 20th suffered 129 of its own casualties, 40 of them fatalities. Though the phrase, "like a gate swinging on a post," is as apt a description of the 20th's charge as any other, it is not as literal as many have since believed. One major problem is that there is no command in the books of Civil War tactics that would cause half of a regiment to perform a wheeling maneuver. Another is that the critical linchpin of the wheeling move was the center of the regiment, which rested on the top of a boulder that provided a 20-foot drop straight down. No regiment in either army was experienced and strong enough to perform a wheeling maneuver that required the men in the center to drop 20 feet from a boulder, land safely, remain on their feet, and continue their marching. The size of the drop at the 20th Maine Center is shown in two images taken more than a century ago from nearly the same location and angle. The image on the right is an engraving of a photograph from 1882 showing members of the regiment on the day they chose the site for their monument. On the left, Ellis Spear, who acted as major of the 20th Maine at Gettysburg during his last visit to Little Round Top after 1910. The left wing of the regiment, which he commanded, charged over the ground directly behind him from left to right. As you can see, there is no realistic way that the left wing literally swung like a gate on a post. They simply followed the enemy in the direction they ran, back toward Round Top and the rest of their brigade.